A tragedy of monumental proportions. That's how the president of Virginia Tech described the horror that unfolded there. The deadliest mass shooting in American history. It's a tragedy, and at this hour without explanation. We know that a gunman opened fire, killing at least 31 people, and that the gunman is also dead. At least 20 others were wounded. The campus is in shock, and America is struggling to make sense of something so senseless. All this comes at a sobering moment, just 5 days before the anniversary of the Columbine High School massacre. That 1999 tragedy claimed 15 lives, including the 2 teenage gunmen who committed suicide.
On April 16, 2007, Virginia Tech University became the site of one of the deadliest school shootings in American history. What unfolded that day was not just a tragedy. It was the culmination of years of ignored warning signs, missed opportunities for intervention, and a system that failed at every critical juncture. Seung-hui Cho was born on January 18, 1984, in Seoul, South Korea. His family lived in a basement apartment, a common type of housing in South Korea that forces many families to live below ground level, often hidden beneath shops and commercial buildings. These cramped, humid spaces are typically the only option for financially struggling families. His father owned a bookstore that barely managed to pay the bills, while his mother was a homemaker caring for both children. Seeking a better future, the family immigrated to the United States, where they opened a dry cleaning business and began regularly attending a Christian church. From an early age, Cho was described as extremely shy and reserved. He rarely made eye contact, seldom spoke, and no family member could recall him ever showing affection. Some relatives suspected he suffered from a mental illness or disorder. His grandfather was particularly concerned about the boy's overly withdrawn behavior. Every day after school, Cho would cry and repeatedly have fits of rage, saying he didn't want to return to school. The boy never had a friend or girlfriend. Despite being completely isolated and quiet, Cho was an excellent and intelligent student, consistently achieving the highest grades in his class. Before we continue with this disturbing story, I want to pause for a moment. If you're finding this case as compelling and tragic as I am, and you want to stay updated on more deep-dive true crime content like this, please consider subscribing to the channel. We dive deep into cases that shaped history, examining not just what happened, but why it happened, and what we can learn from it. Your subscription helps us continue bringing you these important stories. At age 8, already in the United States, Cho's parents became genuinely concerned about their son's behavior. He rarely spoke, so they took him to a doctor. After being referred to a specialist, Cho was diagnosed with selective mutism, a social anxiety disorder that, in cases like Cho's, severely inhibits speech, drastically restricting communication with other people. This condition occurs mainly in shy, introverted, and anxious individuals. His school peers described Cho as an isolated child who never showed interest in starting conversations or friendships. Due to his lack of social skills, Cho suffered significant school bullying, as reported by teachers, likely the same reason he cried every day after school. In 1999, while still in school, Cho witnessed on television the fury of 2 boys who had carried out an attack against their own school, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. Consumed by the fascination of that tragic event, Cho began having terrible ideas. The isolated boy who never had friends identified with that pair of teenagers, which is particularly tragic, as he could have been inspired by many other good people with more promising futures. Due to Cho's special condition, teachers were instructed not to require him to speak publicly, as selective mutism would prevent him from expressing himself in front of the class. In his junior year, he submitted a school assignment, expressing his desire to replicate Columbine. His parents were alerted by the school administration, and Cho was taken to a psychiatrist, beginning closer monitoring. This story shows us how warning signs can be missed or mishandled. If you think this case highlights important issues about mental health awareness and intervention, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with others. Sometimes these stories need to be told to prevent future tragedy. After a complicated childhood and adolescence filled with bullying and isolation, Cho graduated high school and reached adulthood. The family lived in Virginia, and Cho expressed wanting to discontinue psychiatric treatment. Although he had special conditions, He wasn't considered insane and could function in society within his limitations. At the time, he posed no danger to others, so his treatment couldn't be compulsory. In 2003, despite his parents' disapproval of discontinuing treatment, Cho became a student at Virginia Tech, a famous technology-focused university. Living on campus, he initially started studying information technology. But as time passed, his grades began to decline. He switched courses to study English with the goal of becoming a writer. In this course, his grades worsened even more. Quite unusual for someone who had always been so dedicated and intelligent. Cho's roommates and classmates described him once again as very reserved and shy. Sometimes he would write song lyrics or self-composed poems on his room walls. If the university discovered the vandalism, all dormitory students would have to pay for repairs, so his roommates forced Cho to paint over his writings every time. These same roommates tried to approach and talk to Cho multiple times but were unsuccessful. They invited him to parties within the university, but Cho chose to sit isolated in a corner. Sometimes he introduced himself with the name ? At one point, while accompanied by one of his dormitory roommates, Cho suddenly pulled out a knife without saying anything and began stabbing the carpet. After this incident, he was never again invited to parties or gatherings. Cho began attending classes wearing dark sunglasses and a hat that covered part of his face. He would extend his phone under some girls and take photos, causing discomfort to all students. Despite telling his roommates he had an imaginary girlfriend named Jelly, he began stalking some girls on campus. On one occasion, Cho said that looking into a girl's eyes, he found only promiscuity. This stalking behavior resulted in several complaints, leading university officials to visit Cho's room asking him to stop. In one of his classes, the poetry professor noted that the classroom was becoming increasingly empty and discovered from a student that others were afraid of Cho and therefore no longer attended class. The professor went to school administration demanding Cho be removed from her class, or she would resign. Cho was then relocated to another subject. After being reported many times for sending uncomfortable messages to other female students, Cho sent a message to a colleague saying he was going to take his own life. Worried, the young man contacted his own father for advice. The university was informed, and campus police arrived at Cho's room, fearing he might actually attempt suicide. The boy was taken to a mental health clinic and voluntarily hospitalized. I want to hear your thoughts on this case. What do you think could have been done differently to prevent this tragedy? Were there specific moments where intervention might have changed the outcome? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your insights help create meaningful discussions about these important topics. On December 13, 2005, Cho was diagnosed with depression, with flat affect, a term used when an individual suffers from depression, but manages to hide this condition, making no one around them notice any change in behavior. This condition can be observed alongside schizophrenia, some degrees of autism, and brain trauma caused by serious injuries. The day after hospitalization, Cho was released from the clinic. Hours later, the responsible doctor concluded that despite his conditions, Cho was sane and capable of making value judgments. However, he suspected the boy was an imminent danger to himself and others, requesting that Cho receive treatment for his conditions. The case was taken to court so legal power could act, and the responsible judge ordered that the doctor's suggestion be followed. However, no Virginia health system, neither the court, nor the university, nor community officials executed the judge's order. Cho never received the treatment suggested by the doctor, nor was psychological monitoring carried out by the state. In Virginia, an individual who has been involuntarily committed for mental health issues or diagnosed as mentally incapable cannot legally acquire a firearm. Despite his conditions, Cho didn't fit into either of these categories. Certain of his revenge, in February 2007, Cho took the first step toward destruction by legally purchasing his first firearm online, a .22 caliber semi-automatic pistol. On March 13th, Cho acquired his second firearm, a Glock 19 semi-automatic pistol. In the following days, he also bought more than 10 loaded magazines and a ballistic vest. Cho went to a shooting range to practice, a location just minutes from his university. Knowing what happened later makes this even more disturbing. Cho was tired of how the world worked. He couldn't stand perceiving that he didn't fit into society, or how society couldn't fit around him. He didn't understand the world, and that feeling seemed reciprocal. April 16, 2007, became a date marked by immense suffering and terror for Virginia Tech students. At 6:47 a.m., Cho was seen near a neighboring dormitory. Access to the building and rooms was restricted until 10 a.m., only for people with magnetic cards. How Cho gained entry remains unknown. At 7:15 a.m., Cho went up to the 4th floor, entering the room of Emily Hilscher, a 19-year-old student recently arrived at the university. Alone in the room, the girl screamed when she saw Cho with his weapon pointed at her. Her screams woke student Ryan Christopher Clark, who jumped from his bed running to respond to the young woman's cries. As soon as he entered the room, Clark found himself centimeters from Cho's pistol barrel. Cho fired. Ryan received a single shot and fell lifeless behind the door. Cho then turned to Emily and shot the young woman in the head with a single shot, killing her instantly. With the blood of 2 victims already on his clothes, Cho left the building and returned to his own room. He digitally stored some photos of himself wielding his weapons, a 23-page manifesto, and videos explaining all the reasons he was doing this. This material was sealed in a package to be mailed to NBC News. His objective was for his message to be spread worldwide through newspapers and news programs. After sending the package, Cho deleted his email account and university system account, removed his computer's hard drive where files were stored, and prepared for the second part of his attack. Both firearms, ballistic vest, ammunition, knives, and chains completed his arsenal stored in his backpack. At 9:40 a.m., Cho entered Norris Hall, the main building for engineering and mechanical sciences students. In his backpack he carried chains and heavy padlocks, a hammer, a knife, 2 firearms with 10 and 15-round magazines, and approximately 400 rounds of ammunition. Cho chained the exit doors, trapping all students inside the building with him and his 400+ rounds. On the door he placed a note reading, "Attempting to open this door will trigger a bomb." The objective was obviously to further delay police response. Cho went to an empty second-floor classroom, room 200, where he put on his ballistic vest. He emerged with both pistols loaded. Some students noticed Cho peering into classrooms, but thought he was just a lost student looking for his class. In reality, it was a cold, cruel killer conducting field reconnaissance before beginning his attack. Room 206. There were 13 students and 1 professor in that classroom. Cho's terrible thoughts finally leaked from his head in the form of gunshots. 10 of the 13 students in that room were shot in Cho's first volley. The shooter then walked to Professor G. Loganathan, delivering a fatal shot to the man who died instantly. Before leaving the room, he fired again at those terrified students randomly. Hallway encounters. While walking the corridor, 2 students managed to identify gunshot sounds and ran from their classroom. Cho fired at them, hitting Jamal Carver in the arm, but both managed to run and survive. Room 207. Cho invaded and opened fire on the already terrified students. Professor Jamie Bishop was shot and died on the spot. Cho walked to the front of the room and fired other shots, hitting Lauren McCain, Michael Pola Jr., Max Turner, and Nicole White. All 4 students died on the spot. 6 other students were hit. Cho encountered 2 professors from the 3rd floor who came to see what was happening, Kevin Granada and Wally Grant. The pair had escorted more than 20 students to an office, serving as shelter. None of them were injured during the attack. Unfortunately, the 2 heroes didn't have the same luck. Kevin received a shot to the head, dying instantly. Wally was shot in the back while running, but managed to hide in the bathroom and survive. Room 207. Professor Jocelyn Couture Nowak perceived the shooter coming toward her classroom and ordered her students to get down and call police. With a student's help, the professor pushed furniture to try to barricade the door, but Cho managed to force his way in. The shooter fired through the door, hitting both Aaron Peterson and Couture Nowak died on the spot. 1 student, Matthew Laporte, ran toward the shooter to tackle him and neutralize the threat. Unfortunately, the young man was shot 7 times in the process, falling just centimeters from Cho. There were 18 other students in that classroom, terrified by his fury. The shooter walked among the chairs, firing in both directions. 9 students were fatally shot, losing their lives under their desks. 4 other students were hit by gunshots, As police arrived and the SWAT team prepared to enter the building, Cho continued his rampage. When the shooter noticed the police presence coming down the stairs, he moved to the final part of his plan. Cho used every last second he could to fight for his terrible revolution. With his back to the door and facing the window in room 21, Cho turned his pistol against his own head and fired, ending his own life. The Virginia Tech massacre had finally ended. In total, 32 people were murdered and 23 others were wounded. Of the 32 deaths, 28 were from gunshots to the head, including the shooter. 33 lives were lost that day. Cho fired 170 shots. At the time, it was the largest massacre in history by a single shooter and remains today as the attack with the highest number of deaths at a school. What Cho did was terrible and unjustifiable. No matter how great his revolt and pain, he had no right to take the lives of those people. He believed the world was unjust, and ultimately joined it, trapping numerous innocent students in a building they would never leave alive. This case shows us the devastating consequences when warning signs are ignored and systems fail. If stories like this make you think about the importance of mental health awareness, intervention, and the responsibility we all share in looking out for one another, please subscribe to continue these important conversations. Your engagement helps spread awareness about these critical issues. In memoriam, we remember and honor the 32 innocent victims of the Virginia Tech massacre who lost their lives on April 16.